The State of New Jersey versus Michael Olenowski, Olenowski. You might ask why this case is important, and I'm going to tell you why. In this case, very simply, the defendant, Mr. Olenowski, was charged with DWI on actually two separate circumstances, dating back to 2015. Now, you're thinking, okay, 5 years later, what's the difference? What's going on here? In this case, Mr. Olenowski had a blood alcohol content in the first incident of 0.04. You might remember that in order to be legally intoxicated and unable to drive, per the law, getting a DUI is 0.08. So he had, in his first case, 0.04. In the second case, 0. His BAC was absolute 0. And yet, in both of those cases, despite not having a BAC that hit the legal limit, above the legal limit, he was still charged with a DUI. The basis for those charges was what they call a drug recognition report. A drug recognition report is made by a police officer under the certification of a drug recognition expert. A police officer can get a drug recognition expert certification based in the state police, the state of New Jersey. They offer this certification. It's a pretty intensive course. Done a decent amount of reading into it, including how they go about providing this certification, type of tests that the police officers have to go through. Very, very intensive process in order to establish this drug recognition expert certification, number one, and then number two, the ability to write a report based on your experience or your certification. So Mr. Olenowski, on two separate circumstances, received DUIs based on what the police officers in his case allege is the utilization of controlled dangerous substances. That can be one of any number of things. Frankly, it could be even prescription drugs. It's not just recreational drugs that we think of. Some of the recreational drugs obviously would include like heroin, cocaine, mushrooms, or obviously marijuana. So in this circumstance, he received DUIs on two separate occasions on what they suspect is the usage of marijuana. So as they continued through this case in the municipal court where Mr. Olenowski was charged, the state, as well as the municipal prosecutor through the police department, offered up these drug recognition expert reports. When they were challenged as to their admissibility, the municipal court upheld their scientific reliability, for lack of a better term. That case by Mr. Olenowski was appealed by his attorneys. After being appealed by his attorneys, it went up to the appellate court. The appellate court affirmed meaning that they agreed with the municipal court, saying that the drug recognition expert report was scientifically reliable. So generally how they establish the expert reports being scientifically reliable is based on a couple things. Number one, it starts with expert testimony within the profession. So you're going to be talking about doctors or scientists who are able to understand controlled dangerous substances, number one, and number two, their effect on the human body, and the usage of those scientists or doctors in expert testimony in cases. The second part is going to be any scientific or legal writings that discuss the science behind why a drug recognition expert report is scientifically reliable, what the basis of what they're doing is scientifically reliable. And then the third part is judicial opinions. So they're going to be making a determination on whether or not an expert report is scientifically reliable based on the amount of courts that have accepted the drug recognition expert report as, generally scientifically reliable. So in this circumstance, it was widely believed that a drug recognition expert report would be scientifically reliable. I myself have handled cases regarding it. And in the case with Mr. Olenowski, it went up to the highest court in the state of New Jersey. Following its entry to the highest court essentially made a determination that drug recognition experts, as of now, are not scientifically reliable. It's a pretty puzzling decision because the interpretation of the amount of information provided by the highest court is really wide open. So the highest court is saying that drug recognition experts are not necessarily inherently scientifically reliable. And the reason why the highest court is saying that is because they are requiring the municipal courts or superior courts, if necessary, to conduct what are called FRI hearings, F-R-Y-E. An F-R-Y-E FRI hearing determines the scientific reliability of an expert report. So in these times where we're discussing the potential legalization of marijuana, especially for law enforcement, this is a very important time in which having the determination of the scientific reliability of the drug recognition expert report is really, really important. So as of right now, the Attorney General of the state of New Jersey applied for a stay of all proceedings that have a drug recognition expert report involved, and the highest court denied that stay, interestingly enough, essentially stating that in these municipal courts, they would be required to hold FRI hearings by anybody who wanted to contest the reliability of these cases and of these drug recognition expert reports to determine whether or not it was reliable or not reliable, and allowing the courts to make this decision on a case-by-case basis. So very interesting case, kind of leaving our current situation with especially marijuana very open-ended and really in doubt as to whether or not how somebody could be proven to be intoxicated while driving under the influence of marijuana and other controlled dangerous substances that, if you think about it, being available in the urine or the blood, both of those tests have to be ordered by court order and indicated in any other types of symptoms. The police officers are going to have a difficult time in some respects proving these cases regarding actual intoxication. It's not as simple as alcohol and the blood alcohol content in the alco test. So pretty interesting case. Gonna have some far-reaching implications depending on how these cases start to come down. The Superior Court has appointed a special master to hold hearings and hold proceedings based on the reliability of the drug recognition expert. So right now it's kind of in limbo. So if you're happen to be involved in cases like this, happen to be charged with a DUI relating to CDS or marijuana, controlled dangerous substances, don't hesitate to reach out to my office. I'd be glad to speak to you about your circumstance, and I offer representation for cases like that. So just an interesting little tidbit I figured I'd add to my first little video, and I'll be coming with more information as soon as I get it. Talk to you guys soon.
In the midst of the quarantine, and pretty much on a daily basis, I listen to a lot of podcasts. If you've made requests for podcast recommendations on Facebook, you've probably gotten a list of screenshots that I've sent over. But what I wanted to try and do is summarize and provide some information about a podcast I'm listening to on a weekly basis. The one that I'm listening to right now is called Somebody. It's a collaboration of the mother of a victim. The victim was gunned down in Chicago, and the victim, by the name of Courtney, was actually a friend of high-profile celebrity Chance the Rapper. So, in short, the story begins with Courtney being shot, and they're not exactly sure where this happened, but then he turns up at the Chicago Police Department and what ensues from there. So it's still being released week after week, and I've been following it. Pretty interesting story, and it's interesting to hear his mother, who's the host, go through her investigation and the things that she's been doing, some of the judgments that she's made, some of the observations that she's made on her son's case and breakthroughs, and it's been pretty interesting. So something that I recommend. Also, as an honorable mention, I watched on Netflix a series called The Devil Next Door. Pretty dramatic title. The basis of it is a gentleman by the name of John Demaniuk, who is alleged to be Ivan the Terrible, and he is living in Cleveland at the time. He's got a nice family, and at some point, the OSI gets a determination that he's been identified as being Ivan the Terrible of the Treblinka as well as Sobibor Nazi concentration camps. Very interesting show. Check it out if you have some time.
Last little part of this episode, I wanted to talk to you guys about a question I was asked earlier this week from a potential client. I'll just say a potential client because I have not been hired by this client as of yet. The basic question was, what do I do in circumstances where we're in this coronavirus pandemic, and because we're in this coronavirus pandemic, the contracts or the purchases I've made have become impossible. because of the stay-at-home order, either by the state level or the federal level. Number one, the most important thing you could do is look into the documents that you've been provided. I know not a lot of people do this, but when you go about purchasing items and you go about getting yourself signed up for certain things, most companies or most organizations will be sending you some documentation. That'll be a receipt, that'll be a payment invoice, that will be terms and conditions, that will be manuals or guidelines about your purchase, kind of giving you instructions on how everything operates. First and foremost, it's very important to look into those documents to see whether or not those documents include any terms or conditions. That number one would be, you want to look out for deposits, whether or not they're refundable or non-refundable. You want to look at to what aspect or extent those deposits are refundable or non-refundable. The next thing you want to look at is whether or not the contract or any of these documents include terms like whether or not a contract is impossible to perform. Impossibility meaning unexpected circumstances, unforeseen circumstances, natural disasters. For one example, I myself am, intent on being married on September 4th of this year. And one of those examples, of an impossible contract would be, the wedding venue has asked us to guarantee a certain amount of people, and the stay-at-home order says that we can't have a certain amount of people. Well, because of that, the contract would be impossible. If the contract is impossible, there's a legal doctrine of impossibility, which would generally mean you'd be able to argue that the contract is void. So during these times, that is the first place that you should be looking. In all of your documents, in all of the things that have been provided to you, you always want to try and make sure that you're getting contracts from your purchasers, you're getting contracts from these vendors or these people that you're buying things from. These contracts are important not just to protect them, but to protect you as well. If you have these terms, you kind of know you have guidelines as to how this whole thing functions. It's really important to look in. There's no really, other than that, there's no really general guidelines of how these purchases should be functioning. If you looked into consumer laws, you would know that you have approximately 3 days to cancel a contract and get all your money back minus a certain amount of costs that have been expended to you. And you can find that information in the Division of Consumer Affairs website. And I think it's important to know some of those things. If you don't have these documents or you don't have this guidance by the Division of Consumer Affairs, you're talking about oral contracts, you're talking about verbal agreements in which, in the end, you don't have proof that would be substantial or reliable in a court of law to be able to fight your case. So it's important to get that stuff. It's important to get those documents that confirm certain terms. If somebody tells you something, a great practice for a lot of people that I tell a lot of people to do is send emails in confirmation, send memorialization emails. So you send an email back to your purchaser. Your purchaser says, you're going to buy this item. And in the middle of buying this item, you're going to be buying, you're on the phone with them. It says, speaking of phone, you're on the phone with them and it says, you're going to spend $500. And in the midst of you spending $500, you're going to be getting this. Okay. First thing I do before I get off the phone is I say, listen, can you send this to me in an email? Can you send me a receipt in an email? If they're not able to do that, ask for their email address. Send a confirmation yourself. You send an email to them. Hey, thanks for being on the phone with me. I appreciate your business. I appreciate you taking the time and explaining everything. This is just confirming I'm spending $500 to get this service. It's due by this date, and you also represented to me that you would give me a 10% discount on the installation, yada, yada, yada. Write all that down in an email. Please confirm when you receive. Send out that email ASAP. You've confirmed the details of your transaction, okay? Confirming the details of your transaction and memorializing things that you have conversations with is a very important practice. And as long as you do that, you're generally going to be protected if things go wrong. People often say to me, listen, Dan, things don't go wrong very often. I agree. But in my line of work, they do. So I always prepare for them, try and give you the best advice and give you the best information about how you should be handling this stuff. And I know we're in a time of uncertainty, and it's hard to know whether or not some of these businesses or some of the people that you're making contracts with are going to abide by those contracts, are going to abide by those purchases. Everybody's hurting for money right now, and these businesses obviously want your business. They don't want you to pull all the way back and cancel all purchases, but they want to be in a circumstance where, they have some financial security, and that's one of those things. Having those purchases are important. So you guys have my information. I'll provide that below as well. Don't hesitate to reach out to me regarding your situations. You can check out my website, or you can check out sending me emails personally, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Well, I hope this video has been informative, and I look forward to seeing you next Friday. All right. Talk to you soon.